Wow, thank you very much indeed. Right. You must have had an amazing week. Thank you. Thank you for that very warm introduction. It must have been one hell of a conference, is all I can say. Do you know, the one thing I've learned through 35 years of adulthood, most of it in business, some of it in politics, the one thing I've learned is that good conservative values have to be fought for and defended zealously at all times, because we face huge enemies with the establishment, with the media, and worst of all, the biggest enemy that we face, those of us that have fought for conservative values, and goodness me, I spent 25 years fighting for Brexit. But perhaps the biggest enemy of all that we face are those that are within our ranks, those that masquerade as conservatives but actually follow liberal agendas. Now, I say that in the light of the remarkable events of 2016. You know, we all lived through it. We were all a part of it. But actually, in 100 years' time, in 200 years' time, when history is being taught, 2016 will be seen to be the pivot year, the year that good, ordinary, decent people took back control of their lives from career politicians who'd taken us in the wrong direction. And Brexit, what can I say? Brexit. You know, we forced David Cameron's hand. We forced him into giving us a referendum. We had the entire global establishment against us. Even President Obama came. When I say President Obama, I expect to hear a few boos or something. Crikey, thought you'd all gone to sleep for a moment there. Even President Obama turned up in London to speak to our nation, America's greatest, most sincere and best ally in the world, and told us that if we voted for Brexit, we'd be cast aside and we would be at the back of the queue. What a disgusting act. Oh, you're warming up now. That's much better. But I have to say, in retrospect, the British people were so appalled that an American president could speak to them in this way that I reckon Obama was worth 2% for the Brexit side, so I shall thank him for all eternity. And I believe that what we did with Brexit is I believe that we paved the way for a similar political revolution to happen on this side of the pond. I genuinely, honestly, I do. I think the encouragement that the Trump campaign got, the encouragement that the activists on the ground got, is what we showed with Brexit, is that actually, when we do unite, when we have passion, when we have belief, we can beat the establishment. So, whilst I shall never forget that night of June the 23rd, 2016, as those Brexit votes started to come in, and I was able to say the next morning on the Green in Westminster that forever after, June the 23rd will be our Independence Day. I like that. But I was equally thrilled on that evening of November the 8th through to the 9th, when the scores for Trump came through from across the United States of America. So I reckon 2016, with Brexit and with Trump, was a pretty damn good year. I really do. And I've thought back on that year. I've asked myself, what was the best moment? What was the best bit of the whole year, or at least the bits I can talk about in public. And I think it was the faces of the CNN presenters as it became clear that the 45th president of the USA was going to be one Donald J. Trump. So maybe a year on, or nearly a year on, it would be useful to remind ourselves of why those great victories happened and what the remarkable parallels were between the two. Firstly, what both campaigns had and what touched the heart and soul of British people and American people was no more apologies for who we are. No more apologies. You know, I'm old enough to remember the good old days when we had Margaret Thatcher as the British Prime Minister and the great Ronald Reagan as President of the United States of America. And what those two leaders showed is you can be immensely proud of your country, its heritage, its people, its place in the world, whilst at the same time cooperate internationally with like-minded people. Both of those leaders fought for and achieved remarkable conservative and free market reforms. Both of those leaders brought levels of unprecedented wealth to ordinary folk setting up their own businesses, doing their best from the ground level up. And yet once they'd gone, we saw 25 years of administrations in America and the United Kingdom, not to mention my friends in Brussels. Well, when I say my friends in Brussels, the truth is they absolutely hate me, and do you know something? The feeling's mutual, all right? But we had 25 years after Reagan and Thatcher of national leaders being ashamed to be patriotic, being ashamed to stand up for their countries. So remind ourselves that actually there is nothing wrong in belief in the nation state, in its flag, in its people, and in its destiny. And just as here, the campaign slogan was "Make America Great Again" in the United Kingdom, in the clutches of the EU, our slogan was "We want our country back." So let's remind ourselves that nation matters. And let's remind ourselves that the liberal left had been so successful over the course of the last few decades that anybody that dared to put their head over the parapet and even discuss immigration, to attempt to make immigration control a legitimate issue, was automatically written off as being white supremacist, racist, extremist, neo-Nazi, or possibly even worse. And yet what we did in Brexit is we put the message out that actually sensible, controlled immigration, people that come into your nation, that can speak your language, that want to adapt to your culture, that work hard, that don't bring with them a criminal record, that if you manage immigration on that basis, it can be a great benefit for both the host community and those that are coming. But that actually open-door immigration, basically if it's low-skilled and if it doesn't integrate, not only drives down the wages and living standards of ordinary hard-working British and American people, but in a modern world of international terrorism poses a direct threat to our safety and security as well. And what both campaigns did last year, much to the anger of the liberal media establishment and many of those in Parliament and Congress, is both of those campaigns took on that issue, discussed that issue, legitimised that issue, so much so that I was watching television 2 days ago. Stephen Miller, anyone see the Stephen Miller interview in the White House 2 days ago, and I heard echoes in what Stephen was saying in that press interview of all the things that we'd said and fought for over the years. So we must not allow those that wish to bury this subject and to take it away to ever get the upper hand. Believing in one's country, controlling our borders, they were key elements to the Brexit and the Trump victory. But there are more echoes, not echoes of things that I've said, but echoes of actually what Reagan and Thatcher stood for. You know, I believed in the 1980s, by the end of the 80s, that we were living in a period of free market capitalism. I wouldn't argue that it was absolutely perfect, but I would argue that it worked and it gave ordinary folk a chance to set up their businesses and ultimately compete with the medium and smaller, large companies. Folks, if anybody on the left on your campuses now tells you that capitalism is the problem in the West, they're wrong. We've surrendered free market capitalism. It doesn't exist anymore. We are now living in an age of global corporatism. We're living in an age where the big banks and the big businesses effectively own the political process. And what they do is to wrap every single industry in the most complex set of laws that the barriers to entry for small and medium-sized competitors become impossible. And that is why we're living in a world where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And what Brexit was about, and what Trump was about, was taking on these big, massive, labyrinthine legal structures and giving ordinary people a decent break and a chance in life. And we must never, ever forget the importance of that. And we must go on fighting and campaigning for it. We really must. And we should also remind ourselves that another key element that both campaigns had in common was that we were both prepared to talk about security. We were both prepared to confront the scourge of Islamic terrorism. Now, I know that in the United States of America, things are not as bad, not as desperate as they become in some parts of Europe. But just look at the kickback that we've seen. Just look at the judges trying to stop Trump from putting in place some sensible travel restrictions. Just look at all of those things. But you know, they're still in denial, aren't they? CNN are still in denial. Hillary Clinton couldn't even bring herself to use the phrase Islamic terrorism during the election campaign. And can I tell you, another personal highlight for me in 2016 was being allowed to share a platform with Trump down in Mississippi. What a fun evening that was. I could scarcely believe it. I mean, nobody had told me I was going to be speaking to 18,000 people with Trump. I couldn't quite believe it. I was there, I was interested, and Stephen Miller came across to me and said, oh, Nigel, we'd like you to speak. I said, well, all right. And then Trump comes over and says, right, when I get to this bit of my speech, I'll introduce you, Nigel, and call you up on stage. I said, what are you, the warm-up act? So I could hardly believe it. It was an amazing experience, and I found myself the next morning sitting in the airport of Jackson, Mississippi, with Rolling News on. And it was a live press conference from Hillary Clinton. Now, Hillary didn't do many press conferences during the election campaign. But to hear Hillary saying that it was appalling that the Trump campaign had now sunk to such depths that he'd even enlisted the support of a prominent Brexiteer, an extremist, a racist, a misogynist, a homophobe. And I sat there thinking, thank you, God. Because that is the other thing, folks, that you've got to take into account if you're prepared to stand up and fight for conservative values. You will be called a lot of very unpleasant and nasty names. You will endure through social media an awful lot of abuse. So be prepared for that, because I tell you something, those of us on the right of politics may have our faults, but those on the hard left of politics are plain blooming nasty people. They really are. They really are. And when people are being nasty about you, I think it's a very good thing for any man or woman in life to be judged by their enemies. And I think if Hillary Clinton is an enemy of mine, I'm in a pretty good place. All right? So these are the things that won us Brexit and won Trump the presidency. We were prepared to take on consensuses that had lasted for 25 years on nationhood, the ability to make our own laws, control our own borders, recognise the threats that face us in the modern world. And it was an amazing year, but just look at what's happened since. I've mentioned already the judges, but not just here, but across the pond as well. We've seen attempts by the judiciary to slow up or water down the effect of those elections. We've seen a media whose hostility, I think, to both Brexit and Trump is perhaps even more shrill today than it was in the initial aftermath shock of those elections last year. I mean, frankly, if I was to admit that I'd drunk a glass of Russian vodka at some point in the last few years, then maybe the story that I'm a person of interest to the FBI would actually have some legs. But these are the ridiculous conspiratorial levels that our media have got to. You see, our political establishment, our political class and liberal media, they simply still don't believe that Brexit and Trump happened, and therefore they're trying to find some reason. They're trying to find some excuse for why the whole thing happened. They don't understand that it was an upwelling and an uprising of ordinary people. But amidst all that abuse, I would really ask you to think this, that there is now on the world stage one man who is completely unafraid to stand up for his country and for his nation. One man who is unafraid to upset virtually everybody else in the establishment and to run his country in what some may consider to be an unconventional manner, by which I mean Twitter, of course. But that man believes in our common values. That man believes in strong defence. That man believes actually in standing up to the establishment and fighting for change. And I can tell you this, and I would never, ever reveal the content of any conversation I've ever had with your president, but I will say this. The last time I spent time with him, what really struck me was his absolute determination to carry out, as much as he possibly could, the programme upon which he was elected. And to do that, come hell or high water. Donald Trump has restored my faith in national democracy and in leaders who make promises to people that they try to keep. And I put it to you that Donald Trump actually is a true conservative hero. He really is, in many of the things that he's trying to do. And yet, who are the people really giving Trump a problem? Who are the people really trying to stop the agenda that won that election from succeeding? Well, it isn't the Democrats. It isn't CNN. It's John McCain and it's people in his own party. And I think as the midterm elections hove into view, it is incumbent upon all people who are Conservatives to get behind this president, to help him fix this agenda. He's having a tough time, and we too, on the other side of the pond, are having a tough time. A number of chinless wonders in the Conservative cabinet. They're very good, the Tory party, at producing people like that. And a number of chinless wonders are doing all they can to water down Brexit. Folks, if you believe in true Conservative values, even when you think you've won, you haven't. You have to go on fighting. You have to go on fighting. And I'm actually very optimistic and not pessimistic. I do believe that 2016 was the year that changed absolutely everything. And I do believe the values that we fought for, the values that we succeeded on, are values that will continue to go on winning. Yes, sure, we'll lose some battles along the way. But provided we're united, provided we're organised, provided we're determined, I think what last year will show is that we're heading to a different world, a world where the democratic nation state has made a comeback, and not before time, in my opinion. Thank you. Okay. Right. Thank you.
Big Man Tyrone here. Make sure to subscribe to the Wicked Awesome Robin Hood UKIP YouTube website. He exposes the leftist crops on the British Brainwashing Corporation. Nice.